The scent of old paper and older fear clung to the council chamber, a suffocating perfume of desperation. Matthias's desperation. He rested his hands on the polished mahogany of the table, the wood cool and solid beneath his palms, a stark contrast to the tremor starting deep in his bones. Before him, the pack alphas of the Northern Coalition sat in a semicircle of judgment, their faces carved from stone and skepticism. "The annual summit is in 3 days, my lord," Alpha Kalen of the Stone River Pack murmured, his voice a low rumble that did little to soothe the beast pacing beneath Matthias's skin. "Your position, it has never been more precarious. Without a mate, without an alliance to solidify your claim." He didn't need to finish. Everyone in the room knew the unspoken threat. Donovan. The name was a foul taste in his mouth. Alpha Donovan of the Blackwood Pack, a viper in wolf's clothing, had been circling for months, smelling the perceived weakness of an unmated king. The summit was his hunting ground. He would use Matthias's solitude as proof of instability, of a fractured reign ripe for the taking. The old laws were clear. A king without a queen was a throne half empty, a kingdom vulnerable. And summit law dictated that challenges must be formally declared by day 4 of the gathering, giving Donovan a hard deadline to strike, and giving Matthias precious little time to shore up his defenses. A vulnerability Donovan intended to exploit with brutal precision. "My stability is not in question," Matthias said, his voice a low command that brooked no argument. The air thickened, a physical pressure that made the other alphas shift in their seats. His alpha command, a tool he hated to use on his own council, but fear made them skittish, and skittish wolves were prone to making stupid, self-serving decisions. Like backing a challenger. His wolf snarled in the back of his mind. Weak. They see us as weak. Show them. Break them. Matthias pushed the feral urge down. Brute force was Donovan's way, not his. He ruled with strategy, with a sharp mind and a steady hand. But his hand was no longer steady. He clenched his fists, hiding the faint trembling. 3 days. He had 3 days to produce a miracle. A powerful mate from a strong pack who would stand by his side and project an unshakable image of unity. An impossibility. All the suitable alliances had been explored, and all had politely, strategically, declined. No one wanted to back a king who might be deposed before the ink on the mating contract was dry. He was trapped. He dismissed the council with a curt nod, the heavy doors closing behind them with a final, damning thud. Alone. The silence of the vast room pressed in on him. He stalked to the towering window that overlooked the capital, the city lights a galaxy of jewels spread below. A kingdom he had fought to protect. A legacy from his father he was about to lose because he couldn't find a bride in time. The irony was a blade in his gut. He scrubbed a hand over his face, the rasp of his stubble a grounding sensation. The beast inside him was a raging storm, clawing for release. It wanted to hunt, to fight, to claim. It yearned for a mate, a pull that had grown from a dull ache to an excruciating, hollow agony in the years since he'd taken the throne. His wolf knew what he needed, what the kingdom needed. A partner, an anchor. Mine. The word echoed in the empty space of his soul, a desperate, unanswered call. A soft knock on the chamber door startled him from his brooding. His head snapped up, a low growl rumbling in his chest before he could suppress it. "Enter," he commanded, his voice rough. His beta, Lucian, entered, his expression carefully neutral, but Matthias could scent the anxiety rolling off him in waves. "My lord, you have a visitor." She insisted it was a matter of utmost urgency. Matthias turned from the window, his patience worn to a thread. "I am not seeing anyone, Lucian. Send them away." "I tried, Alpha. She is not easily dissuaded." Lucian hesitated, a rare sign of uncertainty. "It's Lady Vivian, of the Blackwood Pack." The name hit Matthias like a physical blow. Donovan's daughter. What in the 7 hells was she doing here? He imagined a trap, an insult, a final gloating move from her father. The beast in him roared. Tear her apart. "Send her in," Matthias bit out, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. He moved to stand behind the massive council table, using it as a shield, a barrier, a throne of its own. He would meet this provocation with the full force of his authority. The doors opened again, and she stepped inside. The first thing that hit him was her scent, muted though it was by the faint shimmer of a scent-masking charm hanging at her wrist, a common precaution for Omegas navigating dangerous political waters. But even suppressed, something slipped through the magical barrier, something that slid past his defenses and hooked directly into his primal core. Rain-washed stone, wild lavender, and beneath it all, a sharp, clean note of winter frost, barely perceptible through the charm's veil. It was intriguing. His wolf, the raging storm within him, quieted slightly, ears pricking forward. It was paying attention. Vivian of Blackwood was not what he'd expected. Rumor painted her as a decorative, docile creature, her father's beautiful pawn. The woman who stood before him was anything but. She was poised, her spine straight as a soldier's, her chin held at an angle that was both respectful and defiant. Her silver blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant knot, and her gown was the deep gray of a thundercloud, simple and unadorned. But it was her eyes that held him. The color of pale jade, they were shockingly intelligent, and they met his gaze without a flicker of submission. She stopped a respectful 10 paces from the table, inclining her head in a shallow, perfect bow. Alpha King Matthias? Her voice was like her scent, cool and clear, with an undercurrent of something that vibrated against his senses. Power. This was no timid Omega. Lady Vivian, he said, his tone clipped, unforgiving. To what do I owe this unexpected visit? Has your father sent you with terms for my surrender? A flicker of something, annoyance, amusement, crossed her features before being smoothed away. My father is unaware of my presence. In fact, he would likely flay me alive if he knew I was here. That intrigued him, chipping away at the wall of his fury. A dangerous game to play with an alpha like Donovan. I'm well versed in dangerous games, my lord, she replied, her gaze unwavering. It is the only way to survive in his court. The subtext hung in the air between them. Survive. Not live. Survive. He felt a reluctant stirring of something other than animosity. State your purpose, he commanded, forcing the coldness back into his voice. She took a single, deliberate step forward. I heard the council's whispers as I waited. You need a mate for the summit. A display of stability to counter my father's challenge. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, bald and sharp. And, he prompted, crossing his arms over his chest. His wolf was awake again, not raging but observing, a predator's stillness in his soul. I am here to offer you a solution, she said, her voice dropping slightly, drawing him in. An arrangement. I will play the part of your devoted mate at the summit. Matthias stared at her, certain he had misheard. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it left him speechless. Laughter, harsh and humorless, barked from his chest. You? Donovan's daughter? You think I would be foolish enough to parade my greatest enemy's blood at my side as my mate? The Pax would see it as a surrender, a hostage negotiation. They will see it as the most brilliant political maneuver of your reign, she countered, her calm unshakable. They will see it as you plucking the most valuable jewel from your rival's crown and displaying it on your own. They will see you as the alpha who took his enemy's greatest asset and made her his strength. They will see power. Her words were precise, calculated, each one a perfectly aimed dart. And damn her, they were true. The shock of the move, the sheer arrogance of it, would be enough to silence most dissent. It was brilliant. It was insane. And what do you get from this arrangement? He asked, narrowing his eyes. Why betray your own father? For the first time, a shadow crossed her face. A flicker of raw, genuine emotion that her perfect composure couldn't hide. It was fear. And it was hatred. My father has arranged a match for me, she said, her voice tight, with Alpha Valerius of the Iron Ridge Pack. Matthias's blood ran cold. Valerius. a cruel, sadistic brute known for breaking his pack members, for ruling with pain and terror. He collected beautiful things and delighted in marring them. To give Vivian to a monster like that? Donovan was more depraved than he'd imagined.
The arrangement is a cage, she continued,
Her jade eyes burning with a fierce, desperate light. This one you offer is a key. My father's challenge at the summit is predicated on his alliance with Valerius, an alliance sealed by my hand. If I am publicly mated to you, that alliance shatters. Valerius will withdraw his support. My father's coalition will crumble before he even issues the challenge. He will be humiliated. Publicly. Irrevocably. Her desire for revenge was a palpable thing, a cold, sharp blade in the air between them. It was a motive he could understand. It was a motive he could trust.
You would be renouncing your pack,
Your name, he warned. He would disown you. You would have nothing. I already have nothing, she whispered, and the words were so raw, so filled with a desolate truth, that they pierced his armor. At least this way, I choose my battlefield. I will be your political prisoner, your trophy. But I will be a trophy you won, not one he sold. His wolf stirred, a low rumble of interest beneath his thoughts. He shoved it away. It was madness. A trick of his desperation, perhaps, of whatever faint trace of her scent slipped past that charm. This was a transaction, nothing more. A political gambit born of mutual necessity. He studied her, truly seeing her for the first time. The steel in her spine wasn't just defiance, it was forged in fire. The intelligence in her eyes wasn't just cunning, it was a weapon she had honed for survival. She wasn't a pawn. She was a queen waiting for a board on which she could finally play.
And what happens after the summit? He asked, the final, critical question.
When your father is dealt with, and I have no more need of a fake mate? She met his gaze, and her expression was utterly devoid of sentiment. Then our arrangement is concluded. You can set me aside, grant me a small estate in a remote corner of your kingdom where I can live out my days in peace. Forgotten. Free. That is all I ask. Free. The word hung between them, heavy with longing. He was desperate. She was his only option. A poison that might also be the antidote. He walked around the table, closing the distance between them. Even through the suppression charm, something about her presence intensified, pulling at something deep inside him he refused to name. He stopped directly in front of her, forcing her to tilt her head back to look at him. He was taller, broader, a physical embodiment of the power she was bargaining with. He wanted to see if she would flinch. She didn't. Her heartbeat was a steady, rhythmic drumming against the silence, not the frantic flutter of fear. She was afraid of her father, of Valerius. But not of him. She should be, his wolf whispered. You will be convincing, he stated. It was not a question, it was a condition. You will not just play the part, you will become it. Every glance, every touch, every word will be scrutinized. There can be no doubt. To the world, you will be mine, in every way that matters. A shiver, tiny and immediate, traced its way down her spine. He saw it. He felt it, a responsive tremor in his own body. Her body as betrayer. I understand, she breathed, her cool composure finally showing a hairline crack. No, he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate growl that was more beast than man. He reached out, his hand moving with deliberate slowness, and brushed a stray strand of silver blonde hair from her temple. Her skin was like silk and lightning. A jolt, faint but present even through the charm's dampening, shot up his arm. Her breath hitched, her pupils dilated. You don't, but you will. He let his hand fall away, the phantom touch burning on his fingertips. The arrangement is accepted, he said, stepping back, re-establishing the distance, the professional, political space. But something had already irrevocably shifted between them. The air was charged, humming with an energy that had not been there before. My staff will prepare quarters for you. We leave for the summit at dawn. She gave him another one of her perfect, shallow bows. Thank you, my lord. She turned and walked away, her back straight, her steps even. She did not look back.
But Matthias watched her until the doors closed behind her, the echo of her presence a ghost in the room. His wolf was no longer silent. It was not raging. It was curious, a deep, intent focus that vibrated through his entire being, sniffing after something it couldn't quite identify through the magical interference. Interesting, it rumbled, a note of possessive speculation threading through the thought. He ignored it. He had to. This was a deal. A dangerous, brilliant, and utterly necessary deal. Nothing more. The air at the summit was thick with power, a heady mix of ancient bloodlines, simmering ambition, and the metallic tang of fear. It was held at the Ethelgard Citadel, a neutral fortress of gray stone and black iron perched on a mountain spire, surrounded by a sea of clouds. It was a place designed for kings and predators. When Matthias stepped out of the carriage, the collective gaze of 100 alphas, lunas, and betas fell upon him. The whispers started instantly, a rustle of silk and speculation. He felt their eyes, probing for weakness, for the scent of a king on the brink. He let them look, his face a mask of implacable calm. Then he turned and extended his hand. Vivian's fingers, cool and steady, slipped into his. As she emerged from the carriage, a collective gasp rippled through the assembled crowd. She was breathtaking. Not in the way of a jewel-draped princess, but in the way of a storm gathering on the horizon. She wore a gown the color of deep emerald, a vibrant shock of life against the citadel's gray austerity. It clung to her form, elegant and severe. Her only adornment was a single silver chain at her throat. The scent-masking charm was conspicuously absent from her wrist. She looked less like a consort and more like a warrior queen. Her hand in his was a brand. The spark from the council chamber, muted before, was now a wildfire. Without the charm's barrier, her true scent hit him with devastating force. Rain-washed stone, wild lavender, winter frost, and beneath it all, something uniquely, intoxicatingly her. It was a low, constant current, humming just beneath his skin, setting every nerve ending on high alert. His wolf surged forward with a snarl of recognition that he barely managed to suppress. He could feel the fine tremble in her hand, the only sign of her tension, and his grip tightened instinctively, a silent message. I have you. He tucked her hand into the crook of his arm, and they began to walk up the grand stone steps. The whispers intensified, turning from speculation to shock. He could hear snippets. Donovan's daughter? A Blackwood Omega? What does this mean? An alliance? He looks like he owns her. He felt a low growl of satisfaction rumble in his chest. Good. Let them talk. Let them spin their theories. Confusion was a weapon, and right now, he and Vivian were wielding it with devastating effect. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Donovan. His rival stood near the Great Hall entrance, surrounded by his sycophants, including the hulking, sneering form of Alpha Valerius. Donovan's face, when he saw his daughter on Matthias's arm, was a mask of pure, undiluted fury. His swarthy complexion turned a blotchy red, his fists clenching at his sides. Valerius looked equally stunned, his piggish eyes narrowing with malevolent disbelief. Vivienne didn't even glance at them. Her focus was entirely forward, her expression serene, a perfect picture of a devoted mate arriving at her alpha's side. But Matthias could feel the tension thrumming through her, a wire pulled taut. He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of her ear, the gesture intimate and possessive for the onlookers. Breathe, he murmured, his voice too low for anyone else to hear. You are a queen at my side, not a prisoner on her way to the gallows. Her scent, that intoxicating mix of stone and lavender, sharpened with a fresh note of defiance. The view is much the same, she whispered back, her tone dry. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. He hadn't expected her to have a spine of tungsten and a wit to match. Inside, the great hall was a maelstrom of political maneuvering. Alphas postured, Lunas traded information cloaked in compliments, and the air crackled with unspoken challenges. Vivienne was magnificent. She moved through the throng with a grace that was both fluid and formidable. She remembered the names of obscure pack heirs, inquired after the health of a powerful Luna's aging mother, and debated trade routes with a grizzled alpha from the coastal packs, with a knowledge that stunned him. She wasn't playing a part. She was a natural. She deflected probing questions with disarming charm and gathered intelligence with a smile. She would subtly steer him toward a wavering ally or murmur a warning in his ear about a rival's new beta. They moved as one entity, a seamless, lethal partnership. He had expected a pawn to place on the board. He had found a second player. Later that evening, in the sprawling suite assigned to them, a suite with a single massive bed that loomed in the center of the main chamber like a sacrificial altar, the masks came off. Vivian sank onto a velvet chaise, the vibrant green of her dress stark against the deep blue fabric. She kicked off her shoes with a sigh, rubbing her temples. The perfect, serene mask was gone, replaced by a weary frustration. Lord Titus of the Sunstone Pack is a lecherous old goat, she stated, her voice flat. And his Luna knows it, which is why she watches his trade accounts like a hawk. He's skimming from the pack coffers to fund his dalliances. Use that. Matthias, who had been pouring 2 glasses of wine, paused. How could you possibly know that? Women talk, she said simply, meeting his eyes. Especially when they think the person they're talking to is a powerless, decorative Omega. They underestimate me. They always have. It's the greatest weapon my father ever gave me. He trained all his children in combat and strategy. He believed weakness invited challenge. But with me, he went further. When I was young, he intended to groom me as his spy master, his shadow weapon. He hired tutors to teach me how to trade, how to negotiate, how to manipulate court politics. And he hired a retired royal assassin to teach me how to kill, should I ever need to defend his interests with a blade instead of words. Her expression hardened. But then he decided a marriage alliance was more valuable than a spy. He assumed that because I never fought back against his cruelty, I didn't have the spine to use anything he taught me. His fatal arrogance. He never believed I'd turn those lessons against him. Matthias absorbed this, reassessing everything he thought he knew about the woman before him. She wasn't a pawn who had learned to fight. She was a weapon who had learned to hide. He handed her a glass, their fingers brushing. That electric current flared again, stronger this time without the barrier of the charm. He saw her sharp intake of breath, the way her gaze dropped to their hands before flicking back up to his face. Her body was constantly betraying her composure around him. And his, he was beginning to realize, was doing the same. His wolf was obsessed with her scent, with the proximity of her, pacing the borders of his control. You were impressive today, he admitted, the words feeling inadequate. He sat in an armchair opposite her, creating a deliberate distance. The suite had only one bed, and neither of them had addressed the elephant in the room. The tension in the space was a living thing. It coiled in the air between them, thick and heavy with unspoken thoughts and the overwhelming pull of their biology. I was doing my job, she said, taking a sip of wine, fulfilling my end of our arrangement. This feels like more than that, he said, his voice quiet. He watched the play of firelight on her face, the way it caught in the silver strands of her hair. You fight as if this kingdom were your own. Her mask of cool detachment slipped back into place. A prisoner rattling the bars of her old cage is not the same as a queen defending her new one, my lord. My motives remain my own. Clipped, tense, she was pushing him away, re-establishing the lines of their contract. But her scent told a different story. Beneath the lavender and frost, a new note was emerging. Something warm and sweet like honeyed amber. A scent of arousal, of interest. His own scent was likely thick with possession, the feral musk of an alpha assessing a potential mate. He was losing control, and he knew it. This forced proximity was a unique form of torture, sharing a suite, a sitting room, the same God's-damned air. His wolf wanted to bridge the distance between them, to pull her onto his lap and breathe in her scent until he was drunk on it. The bed, he said abruptly, gesturing to the massive four-poster. You should take it. I'll take the chaise. She looked at him, surprise flickering across her features. That's hardly appropriate for a king. The bond,
he interrupted, his voice rough. Whatever this is between us, biology, desperation, the gods playing games, it's overwhelming. New. We both need space to process it before we... He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Before we make this real in ways we can't take back. Understanding dawned in her jade eyes, followed by something that looked like relief, and perhaps, beneath it, the faintest edge of disappointment. Thank you, she said softly. Days at the summit blurred into a grueling sequence of meetings, negotiations, and political theater. And through it all, Vivian was his shadow, his shield, his sharpest weapon. They developed a silent language of raised eyebrows, subtle gestures, and shared glances that spoke volumes. They fell into a rhythm, a partnership so natural, it felt ancient. One night, he was woken by a sound, a small, broken whimper from the other side of the room. He sat up, his senses instantly on high alert. Vivian was sleeping on the chaise where he'd insisted she take the bed, but she'd stubbornly refused, caught in the throes of a nightmare. No, please, she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep and terror. Don't let him. He was out of the bed and across the room in 3 silent strides. He knelt beside the chaise, his heart aching at the raw fear on her face. Her scent was sharp with it, a bitter, acrid smell that made his wolf snarl with protective fury. Vivian, he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She cried out, a strangled gasp, her hands coming up as if to ward off a blow. His instincts took over. He reached out, his hand covering hers. You're safe, he said, his voice a low, soothing rumble. I'm here, you're safe. Her eyes flew open. They were wide with panic, unfocused for a moment before they landed on his face. Recognition dawned, and the terror began to recede, replaced by a wave of shame. She pulled her hand from his as if burned, curling into herself on the narrow couch. My apologies, my lord, she whispered, her voice trembling. I did not mean to disturb you. A nightmare, he stated gently. About your father? Or Valerius? She flinched at the name. She didn't answer, but she didn't have to. The answer was in the renewed spike of fear in her scent, in the way she hugged her arms around her waist as if holding herself together. He didn't move from his position on the floor beside her. He simply stayed, a silent, solid presence in the darkness. He didn't offer platitudes or false comfort. He just offered his proximity, a silent promise of protection. After a long moment, she spoke, her voice barely audible. He said, Valerius would teach me the proper place of an Omega, that he would enjoy breaking my spirit. My father, he smiled when he said it. A feral rage, cold and absolute, washed through Matthias. It was so potent he could taste blood on his tongue. The beast within him wanted to hunt. It wanted to tear Donovan and Valerius limb from limb. The sheer possessive fury was staggering. It went beyond politics, beyond their arrangement. This was personal. Mine to protect, his wolf snarled. Mine. Without thinking, he reached out again and gently took her hand. This time, she didn't pull away. Her fingers were ice cold. He wrapped his larger, warmer hand around hers, letting his strength flow into her. He will never touch you, Matthias vowed, his voice a low, deadly promise. No one will ever harm you like that again. I swear it on my life. She looked at him then, her jade eyes shimmering with unshed tears in the moonlight. She searched his face, looking for the lie, for the angle. But she found none, and in that moment, the last of her carefully constructed walls seemed to crumble. She didn't weep, but a single tear traced a silver path down her cheek. She squeezed his hand, a tiny, fleeting pressure, a concession, an acceptance, an intimacy more profound than any kiss. He stayed with her until the sky began to lighten, until her breathing had evened out in a true, peaceful sleep. Only then did he return to the cold, empty expanse of his bed. The feel of her hand in his seared into his memory. The arrangement was a lie. He knew it now. He was beginning to feel things for this brilliant, wounded, fiercely strong woman
that had nothing to do with politics, and everything to do with the man and the beast inside him. He was in excruciating, undeniable trouble. And as he lay there, watching her sleep, a terrifying thought surfaced. He didn't want it to end. The fourth day of the summit dawned with an oppressive, heavy sky that promised a storm. The tension within the citadel mirrored the weather. Donovan was growing desperate. His initial shock had curdled into a simmering public rage. His allies were wavering, confused by Matthias's bold move and Vivian's seamless integration into the role of his Luna. The whispers were no longer just of Matthias's weakness, but of Donovan's folly, of how he had let his most valuable asset slip through his fingers. Donovan himself was bewildered. He had been so certain of Vivian's timidity, her brokenness. He had spent years breaking her spirit, or so he thought, never imagining that her meekness was a performance, her greatest deception. Matthias and Vivian were in the royal suite's antechamber, reviewing the day's agenda. An attendant had just delivered their breakfast, the scent of coffee and warm bread a small comfort in the charged atmosphere. Vivian was pointing to a name on a parchment scroll, her brow furrowed in concentration. Alpha Marcus of the Silver Creek Pack is the key, she was saying, her voice a low, strategic hum. He controls the northern trade pass. Valerius promised him preferential tariffs. If you can offer him a better deal, a guaranteed one, he'll abandon Donovan's coalition. He's a pragmatist, not a loyalist. I've tried to approach him for years, Matthias countered, leaning over her shoulder to look at the scroll. Her scent rose up to meet him, lavender and stone, and that honeyed amber note that was becoming intoxicatingly familiar. His wolf stirred, its head lifting as if scenting prey. He's stubbornly neutral. He won't be, not after you speak with his Luna, Vivian said, tapping the scroll. Luna Elara is from the Eastern Plains. They've had 2 harsh winters, and their people are suffering. She's desperate for a secure food trade. Appeal to her, not to him. She holds his heart, and therefore his allegiance. He looked from the scroll to her face. The intensity in her jade eyes, the sharp, beautiful intelligence. It struck him, not for the first time, that she was born to be a queen. His queen. The thought was no longer terrifying. It felt right, inevitable. Mate, his wolf rumbled, a deep, possessive thrum in his chest. Before he could respond, the world dissolved into chaos. The heavy oak doors to the antechamber didn't just open, they exploded inward, blasted off their hinges by a force that shook the very stone of the citadel. Splinters of wood and iron flew like shrapnel. A shimmering silence ward, a forbidden magical artifact, had been placed on the chamber, its dark energy now dissipating with the ruined doors, which explained why no alarm had been raised, why no guards had come running. Matthias reacted on pure instinct. He grabbed Vivian, spinning her behind him and shoving her toward the relative cover of a heavy tapestry, shielding her body with his own. 3 figures burst through the ruined doorway, clad in black leather armor, their faces obscured by grim, featureless masks. They moved with the silent, deadly grace of trained assassins. The scent of dark magic and iron, the unmistakable tang of blood oath mercenaries, filled the air. His royal guards in the hallway were already dead. He knew it with a sickening certainty. This was a targeted, well-planned strike. Someone had changed the guard rotation, let these killers through. The first assassin lunged, a wicked-looking curved blade flashing in the morning light. Matthias met him with a roar, the beast surging to the surface. His hand shot out, catching the man's wrist in a grip of iron. Bones crunched. The assassin grunted in pain, but his partner was already moving, flanking Matthias, a poisoned dagger aimed for his ribs. There was no time to think, only to react. He slammed the first man into the second, using his body as a shield, and felt the sickening thud as the dagger found a home in the first assassin's back. He threw the dying man aside and faced the third, who was advancing with a chilling, deliberate calm. This one was the leader. He was bigger, faster. He moved like a phantom, his blades a blur. Matthias parried a strike, the clang of steel ringing in the small room. He was a king, a powerful alpha, and a seasoned warrior. but he was unarmored, caught by surprise, and outnumbered. They were driving him back, away from Vivienne. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through him. He had to protect her. He risked a glance over his shoulder. "Vivienne, the sleeping chamber! Bar the door!" But she wasn't cowering behind the tapestry. She was moving. She had snatched a heavy silver letter opener from the breakfast tray, its point long and wickedly sharp. Her face was a mask of cold, lethal focus he had never seen before. She didn't make a sound. She circled around the melee, as silent and graceful as a hunting cat. The third assassin, the leader, saw her move and sneered behind his mask, dismissing her as a non-threat. A fatal mistake. As Matthias engaged the second assassin, who had recovered and was pressing his attack, the leader turned his back on Vivienne for a split second to join the fray. In that second, Vivienne struck. She didn't scream or hesitate. She launched herself forward, not with the brawling force of a wolf shifter, but with the terrifying precision of a trained killer. She drove the letter opener up and under the assassin's arm, burying it to the hilt in the soft, unarmored spot beneath his armpit, aiming directly for the heart with the exactness of someone who had been taught where to strike. The man gave a choked, gargling cry, his eyes wide with shock behind his mask. He stumbled, his own blades clattering to the floor. Vivienne didn't wait to see him fall. She spun, grabbing one of his dropped knives, her movements fluid and economical. Matthias, momentarily stunned by her ferocity, dispatched the last assassin with a brutal, backhanded blow that snapped the man's neck. He turned just in time to see Vivienne facing the dying leader, who had pulled the letter opener from his chest with a final, agonized roar and was now staggering toward her, blood pouring from the wound. "Vivienne!" Matthias yelled, moving to intercept. But she didn't need him. She stood her ground, the captured blade held in a reverse grip, her body coiled like a spring. As the massive assassin lunged, she dropped low, sidestepping his clumsy attack and driving her knife into the back of his knee, severing his tendon. He howled and collapsed. She was on him in an instant, the point of her blade pressed against the vulnerable spot where his mask met his throat. Silence descended on the room, broken only by the ragged sounds of their breathing and the gurgling moans of the dying assassin. The air was thick with the coppery stench of blood and death. Matthias stared at her. She was breathing heavily, her emerald dress splattered with crimson. The silver chain at her throat was askew, but her eyes blazed with a jade fire, and her hand holding the blade was perfectly steady. The docile Omega, the political pawn, was gone. In her place stood a warrior. "Where did you learn to do that?" he breathed, his voice rough with shock and a surge of overwhelming, fierce pride. She didn't look at him. Her gaze was still locked on the dying man at her feet. "My father's final gift," she said, her voice tight, devoid of emotion. "He never believed I'd have the courage to use it against anyone who truly mattered to him. He was wrong." The assassin gave one last shuddering gasp, and then was still. Vivienne straightened up, the bloody knife still in her hand. Her composure finally fractured. A violent tremor racked her body. The knife clattered to the floor. She looked at the blood on her hands, on her dress, and a look of pure horror washed over her face. She started, her voice breaking. He was there in an instant. He crossed the room, stepping over the bodies without a glance, and gathered her into his arms. He pulled her tight against his chest, shielding her from the carnage she had wrought. She was trembling uncontrollably, the aftermath of adrenaline and violence crashing down on her. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling her scent, blood, fear, and beneath it all, her own unique fragrance, a beacon in the chaos. Safe. She's safe. "You're all right," he murmured into her hair, his voice a raw, ragged thing. "You're safe." She didn't cry. She just clung to him, her fingers digging into the fabric of his tunic, her body shaking against his. He held her, murmuring reassurances, his own heart pounding a frantic, chaotic rhythm against his ribs. It wasn't just from the fight. It was from the terror of almost losing her, and the staggering, overwhelming realization that was crashing through him with the force of a tidal wave. This was no arrangement. This was no political convenience. The way his wolf had roared when she was threatened, rising up with a fury so absolute it had nearly consumed him. The way his entire being had focused on a single imperative: protect her. The way her own ferocity had called to something primal and ancient within him. The way her courage in the face of death had made his soul sing with recognition. It was the mate bond. Raw, undeniable, and powerful. It had been there all along. A seed planted the moment she walked into his council chamber, growing stronger with every shared glance, every touch, every moment of vulnerability. But it had been suppressed by her charm, by their conscious denial, by the fear and trauma that had kept both their wolves cowering in the shadows. But here, in the crucible of violence, with their lives hanging by a thread and their guards finally, utterly shattered, it ignited. It didn't just click into place, it erupted, a golden, radiant wildfire that filled every empty, aching part of his soul, cauterizing old wounds and binding him to her with threads of light and fate. He felt it snap into place, a connection so profound it stole his breath. He knew her. He knew the steel of her spine, the vulnerability of her heart, the fire in her spirit. He knew the nightmares that haunted her, and the dreams she'd buried so deep she'd forgotten them. And it was all, inexplicably, wondrously, his. He pulled back just enough to look at her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and luminous. And in their jade depths, he saw it. A mirror of the same dawning shock, the same overwhelming recognition. A faint golden light was beginning to glow around her pupils, the telltale sign of a wolf recognizing its mate. "You feel it," he whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a prayer. A statement of devastating truth. Her breath hitched. A single, crystalline tear finally escaped and traced a path through a smear of blood on her cheek. She nodded, a small, jerky movement. "I've felt it since I first walked into your council chamber," she confessed, her voice a shredded whisper. "I thought I was going insane. I thought it was a trick of my own desperation, my need to escape. I wore the charm hoping it would dull the pull, make it easier to keep this transaction. But it never stopped. My wolf has been clawing at me, whining, wanting to be home," he finished for her, his thumb gently wiping the tear from her cheek, his touch infinitely tender. "Yes," she breathed. "And I was so afraid. Afraid it was real, afraid it wasn't. Afraid that if I acknowledged it, you'd think I was manipulating you, or that I was weak, or—" "I thought it was the audacity of your proposal," he admitted, a rough, incredulous laugh escaping him. "I thought my wolf was just reacting to the challenge, the danger, the sheer brilliance of your plan. I've been fighting it, fighting you. But my wolf, it knew from the very beginning. It's been howling at me ever since you left my council chamber." "So did mine," she said, her voice breaking on the words. "It wanted you. It wanted this. Even when I was terrified, even when I thought this was just a means to an end, it knew." The doors to the outer chamber burst open, and Lucian charged in with a dozen of the king's guard, their swords drawn, their faces grim. They stopped short, taking in the scene of carnage. The dead assassins, the shattered door, the dissipating remnants of the silence ward, and their king, holding a blood-splattered Vivian in his arms. Matthias didn't release her. He kept one arm wrapped securely around her waist, turning to face his men, presenting a united front. He was no longer just a king. She was no longer just his ally. They were something more, something primal and absolute. "There has been an attempt on our lives," Matthias announced, his voice ringing with an authority that was new, absolute, forged in the fire of the last few minutes. He looked down at Vivian, his gaze softening with a fierce, possessive tenderness that stunned his men into silence. An attack on the king, and on his queen. He emphasized the last word, letting it hang in the bloody air. It was a declaration, a claim. Vivian looked up at him, her eyes wide. He saw a flicker of fear, not of him, but of the truth, of the sheer, overwhelming reality of what was happening. But then she squared her shoulders. The trembling stopped. She lifted her chin, and the warrior he had just witnessed returned to her eyes. She leaned into his hold, a subtle but clear sign of allegiance, of acceptance. Lucian's eyes widened in understanding. He bowed his head low. "My king, my queen, what are your orders?" Matthias's gaze shifted from Vivienne to the dead assassins, his mind already working. "Strip the bodies, search them. I want to know who sent them." He looked at the leader's corpse and his eyes narrowed. "And check their hands. Blood Oath mercenaries mark themselves." One of the guards knelt, pulling off the leader's glove. On his finger was a ring of black obsidian, etched with crimson runes, the unmistakable sigil of the Blood Oath Guild. Lucian's expression darkened. Blood Oath. That's expensive. And traceable if we find their contract holder. "Search Donovan's chambers," Matthias commanded. "And Valerius's. Tear them apart if you have to. I want correspondence, coded messages, anything. And find Steward Chorus. He changed the morning guard rotation without my authorization. I want to know why." His voice dropped to a lethal growl. "Someone let these killers into my home. Find out who. The summit is over. The trials are about to begin." His arm tightened around Vivienne, pulling her impossibly closer, a silent vow passing between them. The fake alliance was dead. In its place, something far more powerful had been born. The great hall of the Citadel, which had so recently been a theater of polite political warfare, was now an arena. The pack alphas were assembled, not for negotiation, but for a reckoning. The news of the assassination attempt had spread through the fortress like wildfire, carried on whispers of fear and outrage. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, the precursor to a lightning strike. Matthias and Vivienne stood before the high seat, the ancient stone throne of the summit. They had not parted since the attack. She had changed into a simple gown of deep charcoal gray, but she had refused to hide away. She stood at his side, her hand resting on his forearm, a silent, unshakable statement of unity. The faint golden light of the established bond still shimmered in their eyes, a visible aura of power that every shifter in the room could see and feel. It was a primal declaration that radiated from them in waves. We are one. The doors at the far end of the hall swung open. Alpha Donovan strode in, flanked by Valerius and the few allies he had left. He had requested this emergency session of the council, a bold, desperate move. He clearly intended to spin the attack to his advantage, to paint it as a sign of Matthias's inability to control his own court. He looked from the bodies of the assassins, now laid out on the floor for all to see, their armor stripped, the obsidian ring prominently displayed on a velvet cushion beside them, to Matthias and Vivienne. A sneer twisted his lips. "A tragic, yet predictable outcome," Donovan began, his voice booming with false sympathy. "When a king shows such weakness, such desperation as to take a temporary consort for political show, it invites chaos. He cannot even protect his own chambers. How can he be trusted to protect our kingdom?" He was good. Matthias had to give him that. He was twisting the narrative, painting Matthias as the victim, the weakling. But he had made a fatal miscalculation. He had underestimated his daughter, and he had no idea of the truth that now bound her to Matthias. Before Matthias could speak, Vivienne stepped forward, not behind him, but beside him. Her movement was fluid, commanding. All eyes in the hall fixed on her. "You dare speak of chaos, father?" Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the murmuring hall like a shard of ice. It was the first time she had addressed him publicly. "You, who orchestrated this attack?" Donovan recoiled as if struck. Lies, the ravings of a frightened girl, manipulated by her captor. "I am no one's captor," Matthias's voice rolled through the hall, a low thunder of alpha command that made the very stones vibrate. Several of the lesser alphas flinched, their heads bowing in submission. "And she is no frightened girl." "She is my daughter," Donovan roared, his face purpling with rage. "A disobedient, treasonous whelp who made a foolish bargain to escape her duties. She knows nothing." "I know everything," Vivienne countered, her voice ringing with cold precision. "I know about your network of spies. I know about the illegal trade agreements with the southern cartels. I know where you hid the gold you stole from the Whisperwind Pack. And I know about the Blood Oath mercenaries you've used before. She took another step forward, her jade eyes blazing. I was there, Father, 2 years ago, when you met with their commander in your private study. You thought I was just the silent girl pouring wine, invisible and irrelevant. But I watched. I listened. The commander wore that exact ring. She pointed to the obsidian sigil on the cushion. And you paid him with freshly seized Whisperwind gold to silence the elders who questioned your land grab. A collective gasp went through the hall. It was an old scandal, one Donovan had brutally suppressed. But she had known. She had watched. And she had remembered. She had spent 15 years cultivating his perception of her as broken and timid, the perfect performance, so he would never see the threat she could become. Alpha Kalen rose from his seat, his weathered face grave. I investigated that incident. The Whisperwind gold was never recovered. Lady Vivian's testimony, if she can provide details, locations. The gold was melted down and distributed through 3 fronts, Vivian said, her voice steady. The gemstone mine in Blackrock Pass, the textile trade house in Millhaven, and a gambling house in the port city of Cray's Landing. All owned by shell companies traced back to my father's holdings. The ledgers are in his vault, behind a false panel in the north wall. I can draw you a map. Donovan's face had gone from red to ashen. His eyes were wild, disbelieving. This was his daughter. His timid, obedient daughter who had never once fought back, who had taken every punishment, every cruelty, in silent submission. The girl he had molded and broken, except he hadn't broken her at all. She had been waiting, learning, preparing. She lies, Valerius bellowed, stepping forward, his hand on the hilt of his sword. The little Omega bitch is a liar and a traitor. Matthias moved so fast he was a blur. He was in front of Valerius in a heartbeat, his hand clamping around the bigger Alpha's throat. He lifted him effortlessly, Valerius's feet dangling inches off the floor. The sound of choking filled the silence. You will not speak to my queen that way, Matthias snarled, his eyes flashing pure gold, the beast riding close to the surface. You will not speak to her at all. He threw Valerius back into the line of his guards, where the brute collapsed, gasping for air. Lucian stepped forward, holding a leather folder. My king, we found these in Alpha Donovan's chambers. Coded correspondence. Our cryptographers are working on them, but the preliminary analysis matches the contract structure used by Blood Oath mercenaries. We also found a substantial sum of gold hidden in a concealed compartment, stamped with Whisperwind mine marks. Matthias turned his burning gaze back to Donovan. The moment had come. The final move in a game Vivian had started. You came here to challenge my fitness to rule, Matthias said, his voice deceptively calm. You claim I am unstable, unmated, alone. He walked back to Vivian's side, taking her hand in his. He lifted it, their joined hands a symbol for all to see. The golden light of their bond seemed to flare, a visible manifestation of their power. You are wrong, he declared, his voice resonating with the full force of his alpha command. My reign has never been more secure. My kingdom has never been more stable. For I am not alone. He looked down at Vivian, his expression softening from the fury of the alpha to the tenderness of the mate. All the pretense, all the strategy fell away, leaving only the raw, devastating truth. Vivian of the Blackwood Pack is not my consort. She is not my ally. She is not my political pawn. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of profound reverence. Then he met the gaze of every alpha in the room, his eyes blazing with absolute certainty. She is my fated mate, my anchor, my queen. The declaration hung in the air, stunning the assembly into absolute silence. It was one thing to see the bond, another to have it claimed so publicly, so powerfully, by the king himself, and then to seal it, to erase any lingering doubt. He did what his wolf had been screaming at him to do from the beginning. He leaned in and claimed her mouth with his. The kiss was not gentle. It was a brand, a conflagration. It was the heat of the fight, the desperation of their bargain, the terror of the attack, and the overwhelming, soul-shattering relief of finding each other. It was a promise and a vow, a claiming in front of gods and alphas. She responded instantly, her free hand coming up to cup his jaw, her fingers pressing into his skin as she kissed him back with a ferocity that matched his own. It was a surrender and a conquest all at once, the meeting of two equal, powerful forces. When they finally broke apart, breathless, the hall erupted. But it wasn't unanimous acclamation. "This is madness," an alpha from the eastern ranges shouted. "Blackwood blood on the throne? How can we trust her?" "She could be a spy," another voice called out. "Her father is a traitor. The taint runs in families." The dissent was growing, voices rising in suspicion and fear. Matthias felt Vivienne stiffen beside him, but he didn't let go of her hand. He raised his free hand and the hall fell silent, cowed by the sheer force of his command. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the massive space. "Then challenge me." The words were simple, devastating. "Here, now. Anyone who doubts my queen's loyalty, my judgment, my right to rule, step forward. Face me. I am a mated alpha king at the height of my power, bonded to my true mate. I have never been stronger. So if you believe I am unfit, if you believe she is a threat, prove it. Challenge me for the throne." The silence that followed was absolute. Matthias's gaze swept the room, meeting the eyes of every dissenter, every skeptic. His power rolled off him in waves, amplified by the bond, a primal force that made lesser wolves want to bow, to submit, to flee. No one moved. No one spoke. No one dared. After a long, tense moment, Alpha Marcus of the Silver Creek Pack rose to his feet. He looked at Matthias, then at Vivienne, then back at Matthias. "They don't trust her yet, my king," he said, his voice carrying, "but they trust you. And they fear opposing you more than they distrust her." He inclined his head in a gesture of respect. "Time will prove her worth. I, for one, am willing to wait and see." One by one, the other alphas began to rise, bowing their heads. Not all of them. Some remained seated, their expressions hostile. But enough. More than enough. And then, from the back of the hall, an old Luna with silver hair and kind eyes stood. "I witnessed the bond ignite," she said, her voice clear. "I felt it. We all did. The gods do not make mistakes in matters of true mates. If she is his fated mate, then she is meant to stand at his side. Who are we to question the will of the moon?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the hall. The tide was turning. Matthias kept Vivienne's hand in his, turning to face the defeated Alpha. Donovan stood alone, his face ashen, his eyes hollow. He had lost. Not just the challenge, but everything. His allies, his standing, his daughter. He had been utterly, completely, and publicly destroyed. "I invoke the summit's right of high justice," Matthias declared, his voice formal, ritual. "The assembled alphas stand as witness and jury to the crimes of Alpha Donovan of the Blackwood Pack." Lucian stepped forward, presenting the evidence methodically. Coded correspondence matching blood oath contract structure, Whisperwind gold found in his chambers, the obsidian ring from the assassin's hand, testimony from Lady Vivienne corroborated by physical evidence. And we have one assassin who survived his wounds. Under truth compulsion from the summit's high mage, he confirmed that Alpha Donovan contracted the kill. Matthias looked at the assembled alphas. All in favor of a guilty verdict? Hands rose throughout the hall. Not all, but more than 2/3. A clear majority. Alpha Kalen, as the eldest present, stood. The council finds Alpha Donovan guilty of treason against the crown, attempted assassination of the king, conspiracy against the Packs, and murder of the Whisperwind elders. The sentence, per summit law, is life imprisonment and forfeiture of all titles, lands, and holdings. A formal trial will follow in the capital, Matthias added. but summit justice is binding. Your fate is sealed, Donovan. Donovan didn't even protest. He simply stared at his daughter, his eyes filled with a venomous, uncomprehending hatred. She met his gaze without flinching, her expression not of triumph, but of a grim, necessary peace. The cage was finally broken. Matthias turned his attention to Valerius, who was still on his knees, gasping. "As for you," Matthias said, his voice cold, "your alliance with Donovan dies with his reign. But I am not without mercy." He nodded to Lucian. "Beta Rogar is meeting with your pack as we speak. They are being offered a choice. Pledge directly to the crown, receive immediate food aid and forgiveness of debts, or follow you into the cells. How many do you think will choose you, Valerius? How many will choose loyalty to a brutal alpha who's been starving them to fund war machines over food for their children?" Valerius's face went white as the realization hit him. Without his pack's support, he was nothing. "Your pack is already surrendering their pledges," Lucian confirmed. "Rogar reports that your beta and your council have accepted the king's offer. You are alpha of nothing, Valerius." As the king's guard dragged both Donovan and a broken, defeated Valerius away, a new chant began to rise in the hall. It started with one voice, then another, until it was a thunderous roar that shook the ancient stones. "Long live the king! Long live the queen!" Matthias looked at Vivienne, his partner, his mate, his queen. Her jade eyes were shining, not with tears, but with the fierce, brilliant light of a future they would build together. Their fake alliance, born of desperation and revenge, had been forged in blood and fire into the realm's most powerful and most genuine partnership. He squeezed her hand. "Our work is just beginning," he murmured, for her ears only. She squeezed back, a smile finally touching her lips. A real smile, radiant and full of promise. "I wouldn't have it any way, my king." The roar of the crowd swelled around them, a testament to the new world they had just created. Together. In the weeks that followed the summit, a quiet but relentless revolution swept through the kingdom. The dismantling of Donovan's corrupt empire was not a bloody conquest, but a precise, surgical operation. It was a task they undertook not as king and queen in their separate spheres, but as true partners working in tandem. Their days were spent in the council chamber, the same room where Vivienne had first made her audacious proposal. Now she sat not as a petitioner, but in a chair carved to match Matthias's own, at his right hand. She had brought with her the insurance she'd taken when she fled her father's house: ledgers, correspondence, maps of his entire criminal network. She had an encyclopedic knowledge of Donovan's web of spies, his illegal trade agreements, and the hidden levers of power he had used to manipulate the other packs for decades. Matthias would watch, fascinated, as she unraveled complex webs of deceit with a few quiet questions. She didn't command like an alpha. She persuaded. She reasoned. She exposed the truth with an irrefutable logic that left her opponents with no ground to stand on. Where he was the storm, she was the steady, inexorable force of the river that reshapes the landscape. One afternoon, they were poring over ledgers seized from the Blackwood Pack's vaults. The numbers told a story of extortion and exploitation. "He was funneling pack resources into the Iron Ridge," Vivienne murmured, her finger tracing a line of figures. "Propping up Valerius's failing mines in exchange for his muscle. That's why the Iron Ridge pack members are so malnourished, so desperate. Valerius was starving his own people to fund his war machine." "We'll send aid immediately," Matthias said, making a note. He looked at her, at the focused intensity on her face. "This can't be easy for you. Tearing down your own home?" She looked up, her expression thoughtful. "It was never my home. It was his fortress. A home is a place you feel safe." Her gaze met his, and a soft, intimate warmth passed between them. "I feel safe here." The words, so simple, struck him with more force than any assassin's blade. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers where it rested on the ledger. The bond between them was a constant, warm presence, a low hum beneath the surface of his skin. It was no longer the shocking, electric current of their first touches, but a deep, grounding certainty, the feeling of a limb that had been missing his whole life, and was now finally restored. Their nights were a different kind of work. They were for healing. The nightmares had not vanished entirely, but they came less frequently. When they did, Matthias was there to hold her, his solid presence a bulwark against the shadows of her past. He learned the landscape of her fears, and she, in turn, learned his. She discovered the crushing weight of the crown he wore, the loneliness that had been his constant companion before her. She would trace the old scars on his back, remnants of battles fought long before he was king, and he would tell her their stories. And he would touch the faint, silvery lines on her own arms, marks from her father's discipline, and he would say nothing, simply pressing a soft kiss to each one, a silent promise to erase the pain with his tenderness. Their intimacy was a slow, deliberate discovery. The claiming at the summit had been public and political. The true claiming was happening here, in the quiet moments, in the baring of souls. It was in the way she would bring him a cup of tea when he worked late into the night, her hand brushing his shoulder. It was in the way he would find her in the royal library, curled up with a book, and would simply sit with her, sharing the silence. One evening, he found her standing on the balcony of their chambers, looking out at the city lights, the same view he had once stared at in utter despair. He came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. She leaned into him with a sigh of contentment, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked quietly. "The life you might have had?" She was silent for a long moment, watching the glittering expanse below. "The life I was supposed to have was a cage painted to look like a castle," she said finally. "I would have been Valerius's broken thing. Or I would have been my father's spy master, forever living in the shadows, using the skills he gave me to serve his corruption. I don't miss what was. I'm still getting used to what is." "And what is that?" he prompted, his lips brushing her temple. "This," she whispered, turning in his arms to face him. She placed a hand over his heart, where the steady, rhythmic beat was a testament to their shared life. "This is real. It's not a negotiation. It's not a strategy. I spent my entire life learning to anticipate every angle, to calculate every move. With you, I don't have to calculate. I just have to be." The raw vulnerability in her confession cracked open something deep inside him. He had been a king for so long, always on guard, always performing. With her, he was just Matthias, and she was just Vivienne. "I was a king ruling a kingdom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I was hollow. You filled the silence, Vivienne. You became the heart of it all." He lowered his head, and this time, the kiss was not a claiming or a brand. It was a conversation. It was slow and deep and full of a desperate, fierce tenderness. It spoke of shared burdens and quiet joys, of nightmares chased away and a future built from the ashes of the past. It was the kiss of two people who had found not just a mate, but a partner in every sense of the word. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his, her jade eyes luminous with an emotion that mirrored his own. "We have a long road ahead," she said softly. "Rebuilding the Pax, earning their trust, undoing decades of my father's poison." "I know," he agreed. "But for the first time, I am not walking it alone." He looked out over their city, their kingdom, spread beneath them. The weight of the crown on his head felt lighter than it ever had before, because now he shared it. 3 months later, Alpha Marcus approached him in the council chamber, Luna Ilara at his side. "My king," Marcus said, his weathered face showing the hint of a smile. "I misjudged your queen. Her reforms to the northern trade routes have brought prosperity my pack hasn't seen in a generation. Luna Ilara's people are eating through the winter for the first time in years. She has earned Silver Creek's loyalty." One by one, the skeptical alphas came around. Not because Vivienne demanded it, but because she proved it. With every just decree, every corruption she uprooted, every act of mercy tempered with strength, she showed them what a true queen looked like. The Alpha King and his warrior queen, a fake alliance that had become the truest love story their world had ever known, were finally home. And their reign was just beginning.